Small block Chevy swap the world. Just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? It's because the saying is LS swap the world. There's a reason for that. Now, it's no secret that I absolutely love my LS engines. I do think that there's always going to be a place for the old small block Chevy. Like this 350 is making a perfect shelf. Now, there really is always going to be a market and a place for the small block Chevy. To me, that's just more in like your weekend cruisers, hot rods, that sort of stuff. And the guys that just absolutely will not go fuel injected. And we don't have the LS today without the small block Chevy. And maybe a little inspiration from Ford, but who really cares about that? I think as far as modern V8s go, if you want to call a pushrod V8 modern, I think the LS is probably the pinnacle. I think that it was like small block Chevy, LT1, LS, and then the new LTs and all that stuff. Just because the direct injection, I'm not a fan of. Direct injection makes really good power, but as far as just all the other issues that come with it, I think that multi-port injection is just superior, and it's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper. I think it's just better. But that's not what we're talking about. Today we're talking about why the LS is better than the small block Chevy that everybody loves, everybody grew up with, everybody can, toss a rock and hit one. But now that's starting to turn into an LS laying in the backyard, and there's a good reason for that. Everybody likes to talk about their tree fitty Chevy with the 4-bolt main, hop of cocaine, 3/4 race cam, all that good stuff. But the thing that those old timers don't realize, that 4-bolt main that they're bragging about has been upgraded. The LS block is a 6-bolt main. So you can see it has the 4 there and then 1 on each side. That's always one of the first things that I bring up whenever I'm talking with someone about why they should consider an LS when they might be a little apprehensive and all they've ever had is small block Chevys. But it does seem like always the biggest thing that they're hung up on is the wiring or the ECU. They can't compute. They think that it's going to be like this crazy ordeal when really if you get a swap harness or something like the Holley ECU, it's 4 wires you got to connect. But before I get distracted again, because that's already happened a few times that I'm sure I've had to cut out of this video, let's talk about why the LS can make so much more power than a small block Chevy. And keep in mind that I'm talking about a basically stock LS versus a basically stock small block. It doesn't even have to be a stock small block Chevy. The stuff that you can do with an LS to make 500 horsepower naturally aspirated would take, I don't know, $6,000, $7,000 with a small block Chevy to make. And that comes down to a few things. The main thing is the LS heads are incredible. First of all, aluminum from the factory. That's awesome. They flow as good as aftermarket small block Chevy heads. And I think one of the other things that contributes to that is these are a factory roller cam, which is a huge upgrade in a small block Chevy. If you say you have a small block Chevy with a roller cam, oh my God, you're king of the streets in that town. And because it's a roller cam, a lot of times when you do change the cam, you don't need to change the lifters like you do with a flat tappet cam. So even if you went like the ultra budget route and got like a Summit cam for $300, you can get a stage 4 cam from Summit, not have to change the lifters, and then just get some valve springs for like $150, and you've got an engine that'll rev to 7,000 RPM, 7,200 RPM. Like personally, the 5.3 that came out of the RX-7, that was just, at the time, it was just stock bottom end, cam, valve springs, and it had this intake on it, and I've taken that to 7,100 many times. And how many times have you heard about people making 1,000 plus horsepower with a stock bottom end? That's because these motors are just so strong. It comes down to, one, a much beefier block. The iron block is 215 pounds versus the small block Chevy is, I want to say like 190, 195 pounds. So all that extra weight is just more strength built into the block. Again, they are a 6-bolt main, so there's strength there. To give an actual example, like the golden boy of the stock bottom end game is Jack Roberts and his Mustang that went 7s with a stock bottom end 4.8. Which is like 292 cubic inches. It's not even a 327. It's not even a 305. So LS uses hyper-eutectic pistons, which aren't the greatest for like, I mean, obviously, ideally you want forged pistons, but hyper-eutectic pistons expand less in heat, so you can get tighter tolerances, which is super nice. And as for the rods, LS uses powdered metal rods, which are super strong, which is why you can make 1,000 plus horsepower on stock rods, whereas a small block Chevy uses die-forged steel rods, I believe, which you always hear people saying like, oh, if you can make 450, 500 horsepower on stock rods, you're doing pretty good. Now, that's not to say people haven't made more on stock rods, but I think a lot of that is combination dependent. Like if it's in a really light car, it's going to be less stress on the rods. If it's making all of its power way up in the RPM range, things like that. But if we're just doing an oranges to pears comparison of small block Chevy versus LS, you have to upgrade the small block to get to even where a base LS starts. If you take a 5.3 out of like a 2000 Silverado, pluck it out of the junkyard, put it on a dyno, and obviously without the accessories, things like that, and a good tune, it'll make 350, 370 horsepower. And that's without changing the heads, without changing the intake, without changing the cam. It'll probably have dyno headers, but so will the small block. Now, to get a small block Chevy there, you'll have to change the cam. No doubt about that. Those things come with basically just a pinky shoved in there that's spinning. You'll have to change the intake. I mean, if we're using like a stock small block Chevy, those come with cast iron intakes typically. But I mean, like real world, you're hardly ever going to find one with a cast iron intake. If you find one on Marketplace, it's probably going to have an aluminum intake already. So let's say you got a small block Chevy for $200. I think that's a pretty fair price for one you'd find on Marketplace. And then to get it to where an LS is, you'd have to change the cam. So that's another, let's say you put another flat tappet cam in there, that's another $300, $350, give or take. We'll say $300. And then you'll have to change the intake. You could use like a Summit or a Speedmaster one, but you'll probably want to put like a good Edelbrock or Holley intake on it, Wyand maybe. So that's about $300. So we're at $600 on top of the $200, $800 right now. And then after you change the intake, you're gonna have to change the carburetor, which is another $300-$400. Let's say on the cheaper side, say $300. So now we're at $900 on top of our $200. We're at $1,100, and we still have stock heads on it. So I mean, even with the cam intake carb, we're gonna be making maybe 305 horsepower, 300 horsepower, give or take. So now we're thinking we need to change the heads. Now, there are plenty of deals out there to be found. Let's say $150. So now we're at $1,250, almost $1,300 with gaskets and oil and stuff like that for a 350 horsepower engine. Now, let's say we put 1,000 into an LS. So we know that a stock 5.3 on a dyno will make about 350, 370 horsepower. There have been tons of tests to prove that. Just go to Richard Holdner's channel. So we've got $1,000 budget. What do we do? Well, first, start with the cam. Now, you can't just throw any cam in. Well, you can just throw any cam in there. But we're trying to keep this NA, and we're trying to keep it under $1,000. Well, first, our goal is just making good power that we could drive around on the street and actually feel. So what we'll do is go with like a BTR or a Texas Speed, something like that, even a Summit Stage 2 cam. Now, the Summit cam will be about $300. The Texas Speed or BTR will be basically $400 because those are like $389, but then there's shipping, stuff like that. With Summit, you would have free shipping. We'll just say $450. So $450 for a cam. And then we'll need some valve springs. You can get those for about $150, $170. We'll round that up to $200. So for $650, we now have a cam and springs, which is awesome. What does that get us? Well, again, there are tons of dyno tests to show that a 5.3, otherwise stock, with a cam and springs, depending on the cam, of course, will make anywhere from 400 to 430 horsepower. Again, depending on the cam, good tune, good fuel, things like that. And this is still with the stock truck intake that you can get anywhere for $30. So we still have $350 left over. So what do we do now? Well, for $350, you can find a good used LS1 or LS6 intake. Those, I've gotten them for $150. But let's just say $350, just because that's the rest of the money we got in our budget, and we can't really do a ton else with it because everything else is $500-$600. So cam, springs, LS1 or LS6. Let's say LS6 because if you're going to spend $350 on an intake, it should at least be an LS6. Even though, keep in mind, I did get this BBK intake for $200 from a neighbor, admittedly, but again, deals are out there. Same applies to a small block though, so apples to apples. So now we've got 5.3 LS6 intake, Texas Speed cam, and some good valve springs. Now, it might not seem like a huge upgrade, but a 5.3 with that combination can make 460 horsepower. So realistically, for the same money in each one, we made 110, 120 more horsepower. Now, I know there's going to be someone chiming in saying real world tests, you need to factor in like a wiring harness or things like that, and a tune in your vehicle, stuff like that. And yeah, that's probably true, but there are tons of options. If you absolutely don't want to spend very much money, you can cut down your own harness. Like, you can make your own LS swap harness for 15, 20 bucks. And then you can send off your computer to like, I think Texas Speed does it, Black Bear maybe still does, I don't know. But you can send them off to a bunch of different places and they'll throw a bass tune in your computer for 150 bucks, 200 bucks. Like, it doesn't have to be crazy expensive. You would be surprised by the number of people that I get messaging me on Instagram saying that, hey, I just did my first LS swap and fired up, and they sent me the video all excited, and it always gets me excited too because I think it's sweet. But it's always cool. So this was just a quick little video. I don't know how quick it's actually going to be, but I just saw a comment on one of the videos the other day. I think it was one of the ones with the S10, the mid-engine S10. And he was just talking like a 350, 400 horsepower small block Chevy isn't built, that's basically stock. And it was like, it's really not. Like, unless you got like a high performance one from the factory, like even Copo Camaro or whatever was only making like 450 horsepower. And it was just weird. So I felt like making this video, just kind of throwing it together real quick. So that's probably going to do it for this. It's getting cold out. Don't really feel like rambling anymore. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing and clicking that bell. I'll see you next time.